Ananthamani, Managing Partner, She Interiors, and a TIE Charter member. Mr. Ananthamani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam. President Ajit, Charter members, and dear participants. On this beautiful afternoon, as you all are soaked in a delightful frame of mind, eagerly waiting to hear a speaker of high repute, it's both a honor and privilege for me so as to be able to introduce to you Dr. Vishwas Mehta, IAS. Dr. Vishwas Mehta, IAS, Chief Secretary to the Government of Kerala, joined Indian Administrative Service in August 1986 with an All India 9th rank position. Prior to that, he has got selected for the Indian Police Service in 1985. He has undergone a leadership program at Judge Business School, Cambridge in UK, and also a certification course on negotiations for public leaders from University of Cambridge in Berkeley, USA. He started his career as Assistant Collector Koilon in June 1987 and was the District Collector of Idukki and Wayanad and served as Managing Director of various government organizations and departments, Joint Secretary, Secretary, and Principal Secretary of various important departments of the Government of Kerala. Prior to taking over as the Chief Secretary of Kerala, he was the Additional Chief Secretary of many important departments such as Water Resources and later even the Home and Vigilance Department. In 2003, he secured a PhD and the thesis was on a critical study of cultural tourism and management practices, and has also published articles on cultural tourism management in various publications. Since May 31st, 2020, he is our Chief Secretary. Sir, TIE Kerala is deeply honored by a gracious presence, and we are looking forward to hear from your amazing and inspiring mind on the topic of tourism of Kerala, specifically with respect to your thesis subject of cultural tourism and management practice. And now I call upon you to address this august audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anandmani, and Econ Kerala, Indus Entrepreneurs TIE Kerala, for this wonderful initiative. I know that it was not easy for me also to fit into this schedule already decided by you. But the topic actually fascinated me because I spent considerable years in field and in research activities, which actually landed up me doing a PhD in this and subsequent published works on this. I'll be very honest, I was a professional before I joined civil services. And after joining civil services, I became a journalist, a person who belongs to no discipline. He's not professional, supposed to be not professional. A general person who handles, and a generalist is one who is jack of all trades and masters of none. And that is what civil services, perhaps, a lot of people would like to describe as jack of all trades, masters of none. But my 35 years of experience in civil services has taught me that we are jack of all trades, but we do become masters of some. We become masters of some depends on what assignment we get. Unfortunately, in civil services, not many assignments are given to us as per our liking or as per the experience or as per the qualifications which we have acquired. That is why you find when you read my biodata that I'm basically a science graduate. I'm a professional geologist who used to work on oil rigs for 2 years in various oil rigs of ONGC. Then became a cop, wore uniform for 6 months, and then landed in civil services in Kerala, 1987. I never thought I'll do my MBA. I never thought I'll do my PhD. I never thought I'll pursue my academic activities while being in service. But as it happened, my first experience of becoming managing director of a company, of a commodity which I had never seen in my life, in 1991, inspired me to do my MBA, that too with specialization in marketing. And that MBA, subsequently my another assignment as director of West Zone Cultural Center as part of Ministry of Tourism and Culture in Government of India, made me think of a lot of questions which I had no answers to. I could see the stark realities in the field, which were very different from what we were taught. And that inspired me to do some research and inspired me to do my PhD. I didn't do PhD just to get a doctorate. I know what happens to doctorates. The theses keep lying in the library shelves which nobody wants to read. I basically wanted to share these findings with people, world around us. And generally the PhD works are very boring because they are empirical, they're based on data, they're based on analysis, which doesn't make a very interesting reading, except for students who are perhaps doing some research work on it. As an administrator, how do I make people understand what work I have done and what findings I have arrived at, which brought me the PhD. So I started writing book based on my findings. And it was not a pleasant experience. I must share it with you that it took me almost 1 year to convert that thesis into a book. I think first time ever in my life after joining civil services that I had to spend whole nights together writing chapters after chapter. And it was quite tiresome, quite exhausting. And I was doing it as a part of my job. Whole night I will sit, write these chapters, sit with some professionals, some research scholars, some students, and try to correct the data, try to make those findings which could be understood by common man. And I summarized this into about 50 conclusions in that book. I never went for reprint of that book because I never went for aggressive marketing. And the paradox of all this is that my 35 years of service, I never worked in tourism sector after that. None of those findings I could actually implement them in field directly. Indirectly, of course, I got few opportunities, but not directly. Now, what is that I noticed, specifically coming to tourism? I was director of Cultural Center, which had headquarters at Udaipur, Rajasthan. Governor of Rajasthan was the chairman of the center. The jurisdiction of this cultural center, one of the 7 centers established by Government of India, was over the states of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, Dadra Nagar Haveli, Daman, Diu, and Goa. Now, when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, once when he was traveling to Punjab at the peak of militant Bhindranwale's time, he was discussing with Mani Shankar Iyer that how do we bring this misguided youth of Punjab back to the mainstream of life. And while talking, they said, see, cultural exchange across, it doesn't follow the physical borders. It is exactly like the animal kingdom. They don't follow Karnataka, Tamil Nadu or Kerala border. They move across the borders. There are no borders for them. So culture actually disseminates across the borders. It doesn't follow any physical barriers. So how can you have culture confined to one particular state or one particular region? Culture, what is culture? It's very difficult to define a culture. So it's the way we live, the cuisine we eat, the festivals we celebrate, the language we speak, the traditions we follow. Total sum of what we are and what are our surroundings and the country we live in is the culture. It's very difficult to follow that. I was in the Ministry of Culture also. I was surprised to see that when we talk about culture or Department of Culture, it's about temple, it's about monuments, it's about forts, it's about folk dances, it's about traditions, it's about archaeology, heritage, etc., etc. When we talk of tourism, we talk about hotels, we talk about restaurants, we talk about foreigners traveling across, we talk about cruises, we talk of wining and dining, festivals, big festivals, shopping festivals. We'll associate tourism as something which is luxury based, where we assume people flying around the countries who have deep pockets and who can afford to spend a lot. When I worked at the West Zone Culture Center, I was not supposed to deal with this kind of tourism. I was supposed to deal with folk artists. I was dealing with the traditions. I was dealing with the archaeology. I was dealing with monuments. I was dealing about restoration of them, trying to document the lost heritages, the Gurukul Parampara, the rich cultural traditions of the country, which are manifested in hundreds and thousands of ways. Now, you may call it by pilgrim tourism, you may call it cultural tourism, you may call it adventure tourism. All tourism has some definition, but you don't see much word about cultural tourism. So I wanted to know what is actually happening. Now, I was told that India is a country which has, I'll come to Kerala also, but let me build up the background first. How much time I have, Mr. Nanandmani?
We had just mentioned 3:30 till 4.
All right. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. So I was wondering, India is supposed to be a country with 5,000 years of cultural heritage. So how many people would like to visit India to experience that cultural heritage? 5,000 years of civilization. And when I started looking at the figures while working as director of Culture Center, I was surprised. We were getting 0.37% of international tourist traffic. And how much the other countries were getting? 0.37%. And this figure had stayed constant for 3 to 4 decades when I was doing my PhD. PhD was in 2003. The data was in 2001. And I was talking of figures from 60s, 70s, 80s to 90s to 2000, almost 4 to 5 decades. It's not the absolute numbers were going up, but so was the size of international tourist trade business in terms of money, in terms of people moving across the borders. If the numbers increased, our percentage did not increase. Our numbers also increased, but percentage remained the same, 0.37%. I was absolutely shocked. If we are a country of 5,000 years of civilization and heritage, and very rich cultural heritage, as we always are proud of saying, how come only 0.37% were visiting us? And what is happening in other countries? So I started looking at those figures. I started looking at the figures provided by several professional organizations working in tourism sector in India, abroad, all the WTMs, melas which happened in Berlin, and all kind of figures I started looking at. And I found that somewhere we have not been able to market India as one destination. And when I started looking at China, that time, 2003, China, today we are talking about China, 2020 as a big country, but 2003, believe me, it was not that big. And it was still, they were getting 10 times more tourists than we were. You know, a small country like Japan, a small country like Italy, receives more number of tourists than the entire population of the city itself. You know about Maldives, our neighbor here. They were the first country to open out. All over the world, when people are fed up of sitting inside their houses during COVID, that's the first country to open it up. And you cannot get. Yesterday, I was talking to my batchmate, Vikas Swarup, who wrote the famous book, Slumdog Millionaire, on which got the Oscars. You have all heard of it. Yesterday, I had dinner with him. He had told me about this book about 15, 20 years ago when he was in London. And he was telling me that Maldives High Commissioner was telling him that you don't get a room in Maldives today during COVID time, when resort after resort, hotel after hotel, all over the world do not have tourists. You see Maldives, you still don't get a room worth $500. Why? Because they opened. You know, a selected few crowds still kept coming because they were fed up of being locked inside. So, you see, these are the challenges which we have to face When I started looking at these figures, again, another figure really shocked me. That time in 2001, tourism sector in India, despite getting only 0.37% of the international tourist traffic, was still the third largest foreign exchange earner in the country after diamonds and textiles. So how come? Only 0.37% was getting us third highest foreign exchange country in the world in 2001. And third thing, which when I started further digging into this, I was surprised that the capital output ratio or the generation of wealth or the labor output ratio in terms of 1 million rupee or $1 million invested in tourism is far higher than manufacturing sector and agriculture sector. In terms of direct and indirect employment, in terms of economic cascading of effect which happens with tourism. All these figures actually shocked me, and I decided to do my PhD. I started collecting data from domestic tourists as well as foreign tourists, because I was convinced that tourism is not only about foreign tourists, it is about domestic tourists also. There were, that time, 2001, it was 700 million who are traveling from one part of the city to another city. Well, maybe it is Rameshwaram, maybe Vaishno Devi, maybe going to Himalayas, maybe they are going to Calcutta, they are going to see palaces, forts, etc., etc. But 700 million of them. They are also spending money, by the way. May not be going to 5-star, 3-star hotels, but they are spending money. There are markets thriving because of that particular tourism, which is domestic tourism, which we fail to take notice of. And then, of course, the figures of 0.37% of international tourist traffic, which was supposed to give us third largest foreign exchange earning in the country. So when I started looking at this, then I realized one thing, one very surprising thing, which when I started collecting data is there any country in the world which will say my heritage is poor? Even a country which has got independence 20 years ago, will they say I don't have a cultural heritage? Or I don't have a cultural heritage I can be proud of? What is so great about India that we say 5,000 years of cultural heritage that we should be so proud of, but yet people don't want to see? A first-time visitor to India 20 years ago, I still remember, because I was going through this research papers, I found they were absolutely shocked when they landed in Delhi airport or Mumbai airport or any other airport. Why? There were no private airports. They were some of the worst places to land in the world those times. Those times in 2001, of course, things have changed today. Thanks a lot that things have changed. But 2000, some of the worst airports in the growing countries was in India. The moment you come out, people are being pounced upon. Now, I was telling you, everybody is not rich. There are a lot of backpackers. There are a lot of people who come for long stay here. Now, they are being pounced upon by taxi guys. Everybody looks at them as money-making machines. They didn't have privacy. They were being chased upon. If a product is available to them for 100 rupees, they'll be charged 500 rupees. They expect to buy. This is not the way it works. Another thing which I noticed very, very interestingly is that we are trying to show what we don't have. Now, obviously, having traveled to almost 40 countries, I'm very clear in my mind that you cannot show them Samba Festival of Brazil. You can't show them Las Vegas here. You can't show them nightlife of Paris or London, or even the galleries, art galleries and museums of some of the European countries, which are full of display, full of cultural history, maybe taken from other countries, but they have massive displays, massive heritage structures. So you can't show them this. You cannot even show them nightlife of Bangkok. What do an average person comes here for? Suppose he's coming from Europe. He has seen all this. Most probably he has seen those casinos. He has seen those gambling. He's not coming here for gambling. He's not coming here to see your nightlife because India doesn't have any. What he comes here is to experience what India is. And what we are showing to them is totally different. I give my example. Many of us would have gone to Chittorgarh Fort in Rajasthan, which was attacked by Mughals several times. It was destroyed several times, rebuilt several times. Hundreds and thousands of people died, including women, who refused to surrender. And waves after waves of invaders came and attacked that fort because they wanted to capture Rajasthan. If you go to Chittorgarh Fort today, what will you see? You find only empty halls, big corridors, big palaces, but you have no display there. A 10th pass fellow who has not been able to get any job is hanging around there as a guide, and he is explaining to you that this is where Rani Padmini used to take bath. This is where Mughal king came and saw her taking bath and was fascinated by her beauty. This is where Johar happened. This is where the battle was fought. But where is the display? People can only imagine this is Diwan-e-Kham and this is Diwan-e-Khas. This is where he used to hold his courts and this is where he used to hang people. This is where the battles were fought, but there's no display. You go to castle in Edinburgh, in Scotland, a small castle on a hillock. You see the display? Small castle, but every room is full of display. Do we have any lack of display here? No, certainly not. We have enough. And you have live performances, live folk dances who can explain about the history of that place in a manner which people can be fascinated about. So one such experiment I started doing in Rajasthan because I inherited my office, which was a heritage building. It has 128 rooms and only 15 staff to man. So I started converting this into a museum. I consulted the royal family, the historians, and we started converting the whole building as if, how will it look like, how their bedrooms used to look like, how their prayer rooms were, how their puja rooms were, how their kitchens used to look like, where they used to take bath, where they used to perform, where they used to have entertainment facilities, where the women were separated from the men. You know, all those traditions 100 years ago, 50 years ago, we started displaying in terms of actual furniture, which we recreated, along with rich display. And the result was amazing. Second thing I started doing is in the open courtyards of that palace or the heritage building which I had got in the Udaipur, we started showcasing live performances. And no furniture, nothing, you know, only the mattresses. People will come and sit and they pay for it. You know, initially 10 artists are performing for only 5 tourists. It was not viable. But at least those artists were getting sustained. They were getting their livelihood and they were keeping their traditions alive. You know, today, after 15 years of that launching the program called Dharohar in Bagor Ki Haveli in West Zone Culture Center, it is one of the hottest visit spots in Udaipur today. You check up Lonely Planet today, and if you see Dharohar, you know, that is the spot where people queue for watching live performances. So we have resources, we have human resources, we have cultural traditions which are fast disappearing. We don't have to replicate the fake cultures and fake people to promote it. We just let people experience without any hassles, show them what we have. A tourist destination takes years to develop. It requires meticulous efforts. It requires a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of human resources to develop. But it takes just 1 year of COVID to finish it off. What has happened in Kerala now? 1 year, we have lost everything. I feel very sorry for this. It's not that I don't want to do anything about it. About Kerala tourism, you know, look at Kerala. I did a study on this also. 60% of foreign tourists in 2000, I don't know the figures now, were visiting only the Golden Triangle. Where was Kerala at that time? In 1990, nobody had heard about Kerala. By people like Jose Dominic, you know, who were trying to establish some good resorts, you know, like I believe he's one of the audience today. And a good friend of mine, I really admire his work. You know, one of the legendary guys, I must say. There are a lot of people, you know, who have done fantastic work. So 60% of tourists used to visit the Golden Triangle, go back. You know, they will go to Agra, Delhi, and Jaipur, and go back. What did Kerala did different? We created a niche destination. We said God's own country. At least WTM, Berlin, people understand it. You see, what was Rajasthan slogan that time? Padharo Mare Desh. Mr. Anand Mani, do you understand the meaning of that word? People of Kerala, you know, will never understand. How do you market this in all over the Europe, all over the world? Padharo Mare Desh doesn't make any sense to anybody. It's a local lingo which nobody understands outside Rajasthan. At least God's own country of Kerala, everybody understood. Second thing, we don't have forts and palaces and kings to show here. We don't have palaces. We don't have those sites which Rajasthan or Agra or Delhi has. How do we distinguish it? We linked it with wellness tourism. We created exclusive destinations built around our backwaters, our nature, our coconut, our palm trees, our greenery, the nature which had given us. And with 7 months of rainfall, what we did? With 7 months of rainfall, we linked it up with tourism, saying monsoons are very good for Ayurveda. You know, it heals better. Wellness is better. And unless you stay here for 2 weeks, you will not get better. You know, in 2 days, if you go back, you will not have it. And I tell you, marketing or no marketing, scientific or not scientific, Ayurveda tourism And let me tell you one more thing. I don't know whether how many people are aware of it. The Kerala tourism primarily developed. We were getting chartered flights. Today it has stopped, unfortunately, because we developed a niche alone, God's own country, exclusive destination, much away from the Golden Triangle because of successful marketing strategies we launched in Kerala consistently over last 20, 25, 30 years. God's own country campaign. Now, all this is gone. Why? You take a flight from Delhi to Colombo, or you take a flight from Trivandrum. It costs the same. You look at the hotel deals, you look at the food, you look at the facilities, you look at the cleanliness. Colombo offers you much better. So value for money for tourists. So why will they come here? They won't come. Secondly, you have the policies. I'm sorry, I'm part of that policies sometimes. Maybe due to political reasons, excise policy. You make liquor so expensive that all the tourists disappear. Now, so far, we have still not opened the excise here. In fact, yesterday, I talked to Chief Minister. I said, we have to open. Now, Christmas is coming, New Year is coming. COVID will continue to be there. I don't know for how many months. But you have to open this bars. A foreign tourist coming and asking a glass of beer. He's not going to drink out on the street side. We don't have the pubs and we don't have those kind of street side restaurants where people will go and make records. But we have to open it up. Then how will tourists come? Flights are not there. How will they come? And last but not the least, I will wind up with that, and then if you have time for questions, we can take that, one or two questions, is that it will take some time. My request to all the people engaged in tourism is that ups and downs will be there, always. What goes up has to come down. We are going through a tough phase. Tourism is going through a tough phase. We are aware of the difficulties. I am working with the Secretary of Tourism. We are working on ways and means to revive this. Whatever hand-holding is possible, we'll definitely be with our friends who are really suffering. A lot of people have lost their employment. A lot of people have lost a lot of money. And we have to rebuild this magic of Kerala around us, because indeed it's a God's own country and people would love to come here. But we have to give them good value for money. We have to show them they feel safe here. They feel taken care of here. And they feel wanted. So Government of Kerala will spare no efforts to see that we will market what we have, and we should not create any fake things. We should present them what they have, so that they carry a lifetime experience. People who come for long haul, you see, one of the best thing about India is that if you look at any country, I think maximum number of tourists who stay maximum number of days was perhaps India in 2000. I don't have the figures now. You see, I could not rewrite the book again because all these figures have to be revalidated. All these figures have to be revisited, which my current assignment won't give me time. So someday later, after my superannuation, if I get time, I look at those figures, I look at those recommendations. Mercifully, 50 recommendations mentioned in my book, almost 35, 40 have been implemented. Not because they read my book, but because they were necessary for us to survive in the world of competition of tourism. So thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. And if there are any questions, I'm willing to take. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Unfortunately, due to lack of time, might be we'll be connecting with you offline through the mail. So because of the session paucity of time, indeed it was a deep, good observation and statistic analysis regarding the tourism, potential of tourism, which still has to be unraveled a lot. And you dealt a lot on the topic of cultural tourism with great precision. Indeed, there was a lot of noteworthy points and suggestions and corrections needed in the system, and with good takeaway for the audience. Thanking you for the cheerful words and the valuable suggestions. On behalf of TiE Kerala, I express my sincere gratitude to you for taking up time and participating and addressing in TiECon 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.